if I don't have anyone, yes, then I will begin. Mr. President, oh, here we have, fantastic. Your name, a little bit about what you do, and then the question.
My name is Samuel Wangwe. I work with the Policy Research Institute called Report. One of the issues which have been very missing after independence in Africa is attraction to the distribution of wealth and the corruption. Now in Botswana, you had all this wealth. How do you manage the temptation of an equal sharing of these resources and bringing bad governance because of the resources from the minerals and remain quite as a united democratic society?
No, as I said, we were lucky, we had lucky, maybe lucky in having visionary leaders. How do I do this? Visionary leaders, or just the happened or thought of it. As I said, at independence, mineral rights vested in the tribes under their chiefs. We had a so-called 8 principal tribes. And the mineral rights vested in them. And so the government of the day negotiated this, that they should belong vest in the state, and promised that the revenues to be derived from these minerals would be used equitably to develop the country as a whole, to prevent people making invidious comparisons between themselves and their neighbors. And that was agreed. And we even went further and agreed the national priorities, as I said, education and training, public health and primary health care, provision of water and physical infrastructure in that way were the priorities. And then when the revenues did come, actually that's what we did. Revenues are reported and they consist of 3 components: royalties, taxes, and dividends. They are broken down in our revenue estimate and show, and then how they are spent the same. So nobody could say it's not included. So we have national development plans showing what we are going to be doing in plan bill, etc., etc. That's accepted likely. That's how it has worked. Also, when people are really very primitive, they are not corrupt. But when they become sophisticated, then corruption was beginning. So in 1980, I think, 80 or 80, yeah, between 80 and 85, we then created a directorate on corruption and economic crime. So we tried to fight it in the bad, I mean corruption. When the ostentatious consumption comes in and so on, people want to do expensive cars and so on, then the problem arose. But we took care of it. So corruption will always be there, but we have to fight it. So we are relatively successful only because we started early.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Another question here?
Thank you very much. My name is Sam Mumure. I work for United Nations Development Program in South Sudan, the youngest nation on the block. In Africa, especially where institutions are not well developed, there is always reliance on leaders and the quality of leadership to build institutions that can check the leaders. Now, the question I have for Your Excellencies, we have seen countries that you have led where change of power has helped countries to move on. We've also seen countries where leaders do not very quickly, they start as strong leaders with a national vision, but then there is some attraction that stops them from relinquishing power, and that is a big factor for exclusion. What is it to the three of you that eventually convinced you to say enough is enough, we've built up to here, someone else should take over from here, and yet others are actually failing and unable to see that? What is your secret?
And in particular, I know President Obasanjo will have a lot to say about this. Having been at the helm of Nigeria twice, and on both occasions relinquished. Go ahead, and then we'll come to President Mkapa and then President Mogae. Thank you.
Well, I don't know about my two brothers, but in Nigeria we have a constitution, and the constitution is supreme. And our constitution is not something that you can just go wake up overnight and say you are amending. I won't mention the country, but at one time, the Nigerian National Assembly were threatening to impeach me because they thought that I had not been leaning to their side. So I then met an African leader who then said to me, look, what is this impeachment thing we're hearing from Nigeria? Who I said, yes, in our constitution, we have a clause which allows the National Assembly to impeach the president on the basis of misconduct. He said, what exactly does that mean? I said, it means that they can remove the president if they found that the president has committed any act of misconduct. He said, look, you Nigerians should not bring bad things to Africa. You go home and amend the constitution. And he meant it. He meant it. I tried to explain to him that it doesn't work that way in Nigeria. He wouldn't take that. I think Constitution as the supreme law of the land does have to be obeyed. I think there is no other way.
Before you finish,
Yes.
in the 1970s, I think it was 1979, you could have opted to run. You most likely would have won that election. There was no constitution in your way at the time. Why did you opt not to run for purpose?
Yeah. Well, again, in 1975, when my predecessor, Murtala Mohammed, and I were put at the helms of affairs of Nigeria, we worked together. I was number 2, he was number 1. And there was nothing that we did that we did not do together. So we drew up a plan, what we call a political program, to hand over power on the 1st of October, 1979. After we had drawn up that program, there was an attempted coup that took the life of my predecessor, and I took over. Then there was pressure from internal and external for me to go up. But I believe that he was of a gentleman, and if I may say that proudly here, I was then an officer and a gentleman. The words of a gentleman must be is born. I, with Murtala, decided we were going to put in a political program. We were going to see it through. We executed the political program, and there is no reason why I should go back on that. But I will say this: if I had gone back on that, maybe I would not have gone to prison. Because Abacha then sent me to prison when I started criticizing him. And maybe if I hadn't gone to prison, I would not have come back to be an elected president. So it goes from one to the other. But clearly the point is that this, when you make a pledge, you must keep the pledge. And then the constitution of the land, the supreme law of the land, and it must be respected.
Thank you. Your word is your bond. Amazing. President Mkapa, please.
I have never been an officer myself, let alone a gentleman. I can only say that for me it's a matter of conviction. I worked very closely with our founding president, and he imbued me with a great deal of degree of honesty and service. He served for almost, I think it's 23 years. I'm waiting, I can't calculate very well. Almost 23 years, but he led us successfully through a war with the neighbor. And by that time, really, he was weary, and others were saying that it's time we had changed. A lot of pressure was put on him, and we didn't have a statutory limitations at the time. A great deal of pressure was made on him to run again in 1980. He resisted very strongly, and I must say I was one of those who privately talked to him, and he said no way. Anyway, eventually he was persuaded. He did run in 1980. Getting near to 1985, the pressures were even greater. Why? They said, well, we need you in order to change the economy around, etc., etc., etc. And they said, listen, even if I were to serve another 30 years, the economy would not be able to be put right by me. If I haven't been able to do it in 23 years, why should I be able to do it in the next 30 or 40 years? So I'm going to step down. And I know for a fact that when under greater pressure, out I think of a certain amount of disappointment, he asked those who were putting pressure on him, asked them, did you ask me to get into politics? They said, no. Where were you? Everyone looked at each other. Said, so no one of you advised me at the time of entering into politics to go into politics. So what right do you have to tell me when to get out of politics? And that was it. So he said, let's talk about a constitution which will enable for transitions that are smooth and acceptable. That's important, so that we get a good man or woman to succeed. So that's the first lesson I learned. The second one was when I was under pressure as president, under pressure to allow first to get for the introduction of the statute of limitations. When that was incorporated in the Constitution of the United Republic of Tanzania, and you are sworn to observe it, you must get, as President Obasanjo says, you must really live up by that commitment. So I had to do it. But to strengthen that point, when there was pressure to change the Constitution of Zanzibar to remove the statute of limitations and so on, I stood in the way, absolutely firm. I said, no, we haven't even tried it twice, and you want us to change? No. So, out of conviction, the thought of even changing the Constitution, let alone a third term, never entered my mind. It has never, and let me say, it has never entered in my mind to try to get back into the political arena the way my brother in Malawi tried to. President to change the Constitution so he could have a third term. And although he had 2 votes in Parliament, he lost both of them. That's not a very nice way to get out. We've not to leave office at all. So for me, as President Obasanjo says, the Constitution is very solemn, If you swear it, you must observe it fully. There's no way in which I could consider changing the constitution so that I could help us that change. And finally, the country will always be there. We will pass on, all of us, but the country will always be there. And there will always be people capable of doing it. Thank you.
Again, respect for the constitution and the country will always be there. We don't often tell the positive side of our African leaders. We often hear this in our media space, and it's fantastic to hear it. President Mogae, please.
Well, as I said, I had been a civil servant, and I was already convinced that I had formed an opinion that when good leaders stay forever in office, they lose their vision and begin to betray their vision. So, and in any case, in our case, the limitation in the Constitution was brought into being when I was Vice President. So it was very new. And in any case, I felt that I had done enough. And even my fellow members of the party, some of them had always considered me a civil service usurper into politics. And so I was president because I was encouraged by my predecessor. And I felt that, well, I can do as good as anybody else anyway. So I felt I proved that I can do it too. And I was tired, not in my head enough, too much duties involved in that. So for me, it was enough, but also there was a constitutional solution. Then I would not attempt to change it, because I was tired anyway. Thank you. And I already had been saying, so when people stay too long, they do this go wrong. There is, for instance, now, one of my colleagues in Africa, I say to him, you know what, you have done wonderful things and so on and so on. But now you have stayed too long, and things are beginning to go wrong. He says, Festus, I know you have been trying by boyfriend to tell everybody to wrong. Anyway.
I work with Foundation for Civil Society here in Tanzania. I believe building shared societies and inclusive development is about making some tough decisions, not so popular decisions. To each one of you, what was the toughest decision that you had to make to build shared society?
What was the toughest decision you had to make? Perhaps we shall begin with you, President Mogae.
Yes, well, maybe there is not one. At one time, but anyway, I think that when I was Vice President, but let me mention it anyway, before I go to the next one. When I was Minister of Finance and Development Planning and Vice President, many people, including members of cabinet, many members of parliament, were defaulting in their payments to the National Development Bank. So I led to the Development Bank, but those against them, and go and confiscate their tractors and so on. It was the most unpopular thing I ever did. But I stood by it. It was the law. That one time. The next one was when I was president. Again, people were involved in allocating themselves land in a neighboring village close to town, including senior members of the party and senior members who are also ministers. So again, I made a decision that we will confiscate those and we will pull down the houses that had been put down illegally. And when the thing went there, the press shouted about yellow monster, and Festus Mogae, yellow monster. That was very, very unpopular. But that was also very difficult. Because you were dealing against your friends, members of the cabinet. It was members of the public, members of all parties.
elected president was within the first week of my assumption of office. One of the things that we do not seem to have had solution to is the issue of coup. And people have said, put coup in the constitution that nobody should carry out coup. But of course, when somebody carries out coup successfully, the first thing it has is the constitution. So it doesn't really matter whether you put it in the constitution or not. And anybody who carries out a coup knows that he has committed treason and is punishable by death. So when he decides to go in, he goes in to do or die. But we have never really thought that we had an answer. And my background was military. And I know that once a uniformed man is out of the military, it's like fish out of water. What we needed to do is to make sure that it does not matter how long it takes. Once you enjoy or participate in a coup, you can still be punished. So within a week of my taking over as elected president, I asked the military to give me the list of those who have either participated in coups or who have enjoyed the benefit of coups by holding political appointments as state governors or ministers or what. And they gave me a list of 93 officers, from Major General to majors. So they didn't know what I wanted to do with the list. Because if they had known, I wouldn't last 24 hours. So I made it on a Friday. On a Friday morning, I issued the instruction that all those 93 officers, with immediate effect, are retired from the armed forces, and they should lay their feet. Many of them mean that you put down all your uniform by that Friday morning, and by noon, they are no longer required. Now, weekend is not normally a good period to plan. So by Monday, of course, they were gone, and 93 of them, and I think it has salutary effect on our own stability, political stability.
Having development without a corrupt society, which is inclusive of everybody there. You said in the introduction, and I think each one of you mentioned that. You've all been there, you set up corruption prevention institutions, you got your own assessment of how well they worked during your presidency. Now, looking back, looking in, seeing what is there, I'd like your perspective as to, if you had a second chance, what would you do better? Because we all know things have not gotten better since you left. From my perspective, they're getting worse, maybe not in Botswana, but when I look at Tanzania, we live in a no less corrupt society, we still got problems. But I think now you got the advantage of having been there, being outside and looking in. Can you share your perspective of what could be done better?
It is an established fact that religious strife within countries is the single most important threat to the stability of nations across the world. Nigeria in particular has been convulsed by recurring is something that can be faced. I'll be quick with it. The question for President Mkapa is similar. Tanzania's much talked about peace, in my view, is increasingly being threatened by the rise of corruption in our society. I know you tried during your presidency, you set up institutions to fight this cause. It doesn't seem to me that we are getting the better of it. Do you think that maybe now is the time to take our fight against corruption to another level, maybe a Chinese-style execution of people engaged in this? And Mr. President Mogae, I read somewhere the story of the fight between your founding president, Senator Kama, and the Bears in the 60s, when they couldn't agree on the terms of agreement for money, and how this put him on a collision course with his previously good friends of the World Bank and others. Today, as our countries discover resources, gas, oil, but also minerals, it seems to me, for lack of capacity internally, it seems to be going to these same advisors. Yet the example set by Senator Kama was to take your own counsel in these matters. What do you think? What is your advice to leaders today, or countries who are coming to this well without capacity internally to plan how to exploit it?
I see the hands, and I will come back to them, just because we have quite a few questions on the table right now. And so, President Obasanjo, let's begin with you, and that whole issue of religious strife, the question posed by Ali Faruqi. And as you end, you tell us, what would you have done this differently or better with respect to corruption?
Well, let me deal with the issue of religious strife. It is a little bit simplistic, and it is very important. Religious, you look at Nigeria, and yes, they are almost evenly divided, Christians, Muslims. But really, the major problem or the major cause of our problem of conflict and violence is in poverty, corruption, and unemployment. It was tough, but it was tough. And if I hadn't done that, I wonder whether they wouldn't have made an attempt. Thank you.
Thank you. President Mkapa, please.
The question has come as a surprise. I've never stopped to think about this. Two instances. The first one is very early in the presidency, concerning the first ministerial resignation that I had to accept. Why? Because the charges or the complaints were very much fabricated by political opponents, and he was very much maligned. And but you know, with the media publicizing all these ill things that he's supposed to have done, you had to decide whether to continue shouldering him or to say, no, in the interest of the public and confidence in government, I accept the resignation. So that was tough, because it was a key position, and especially because I was sure it was being maligned. But that's a different matter. That was difficult. After that, it was easy for me to balance when public displeasure or public opposition was such that you had to ask people to leave. It was easier for me after that first resignation. The second one is this one which I already made reference to, which was the effort to change the statutory limitation with regard to the constitution of Tanzania. It wasn't easy at all, because you didn't know what would happen to the union, you didn't know how it would be received. But I had to make the decision, and I made it, and I'm glad that we were able to go through the crisis and sort it out very, very, very amicably indeed. Perhaps amicably is an exaggeration, but anyway, thank you.
I see time's going up now. I'll take
My name is Leonard Sousa from PricewaterhouseCoopers. When we talk about inclusive, sustainable development, to me it means really having development without the corrupt side, which is inclusive of everybody, right? We said in the introduction, and I think each one of you mentioned that. You all been there, you set up corruption prevention institutions. You got your own assessment of how well they worked during your presidency. Now, looking back, looking in, seeing what is there, I'd like your perspective as to, if you had a second chance, what would you do better? Because we all know things have not gotten better since you left. From my perspective, they're getting worse, maybe not in Botswana, but when I look at Tanzania, we live in a no less corrupt society, we still got problems. But I think now you got the advantage of having been there, being outside now, looking in. Can you share your perspective of what could be done better?
Thank you very much.
Good morning, Your Excellencies. I have questions for each one of you, a different one.
I'm not sure if we can. Can you choose your top one?
Yes. To President Obasanjo, I just wanted to know, now that it's an established fact, that religious strife is probably the single most important aspect.
Religious strife is the latest
Strife.
Who will let me speak with man?
Let me come. I'll bring it right back. I'll bring it right back.
It is an established fact that religious strife within countries is the single most potent threat to the stability of nations across the world. Nigeria in particular has been convulsed by recurring violent acts caused by one or the other extremist groups. As a person of your experience, I just wanted to know whether this is something that preoccupies you after you left office, and how do you see the future of Nigeria going forward, and whether this being a matter of faith, where leaders also who are in office have faith, and is something that can be fixed. I'll be quick with it, but the question for President Mkapa is similar. Tanzania's much talked about peace, in my view, is increasingly being threatened by the rise of corruption in our society. I know you tried during your presidency, you set up institutions to fight this scourge. It doesn't seem to me that we are getting the better of it. Do you think that maybe now is the time to take our fight against corruption to another level, maybe a Chinese-style execution of people engaged in this? And Mr. President Mogae, I read somewhere the story of the fight between your founding president, Senator Kama, and the Bears in the 60s, when they couldn't agree on the terms of agreement for mining, and how this put him on a collision course with his previously good friends of the World Bank and others. Today, as our countries